Okay, this one, I love this one because we had a great discussion about grass-fed. And, you know, a lot of people, since we did our Wagyu podcast, some people are like, no, grass-fed's the only way, blah, blah. Okay, if you like grass-fed, you like leaner meat, that's awesome, man. Some people like more marbled meat. Some people like Wagyu beef. Some people like grass-fed. It's your preference. But what is the whole grass-fed system? What does that even mean? And like, let's talk about what we were talking about last week, because I thought that was so interesting.
It almost seems like the organic phenomenon that we were talking about earlier. Like
it's very much
ago,
so,
right?
Very,
like,
very much so.
People read about it or hear about it, and they're like, "Oh God, I got to only eat grass fed now because it's so much healthier." And blah 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 blah.
They're actually they're very right. Grass fed beef, high in omega 3s, right? But the problem is as the world of grass fed has grown, people have started to create programs to supply the world with grass-fed beef. And as any business grows, they start to figure out the loops behind what that actually means and how they can kind of get away from it. And I don't know if you guys have had this where you've eaten a grass-fed steak and you're like, oh, that's not very good. And it's because most of the time it's not, right? Most grass-fed beef that you find in large grocery stores are actually animals that are raised indoors, not indoors, but like in feedlots, fed hay, grass silage, not out on pastures.
Right.
And this goes back to the whole pasture grass-fed. To me, grass-fed beef should be pasture-raised.
Yes.
Right? Because that's the healthy attribute and the life cycle of an animal that's eating grass, right? Healthy grasses, nutrient-rich grasses, high-energy grasses. And grass-fed beef, if you talk to any real grass-fed farmer, grass-fed beef should be harvested twice a year.
Oh, wow.
Spring and fall. And that's when the grasses are and this is Pacific Northwest farmers, obviously.
Okay.
But that's when the grass is the most nutrient-rich, right? The highest level of energy. And that's when they're basically getting fat. They're actually naturally getting fat. They're not being forced fed, other things. They're literally feeding themselves naturally. And that's true grass-fed beef. Any real farmer will tell you that that's the optimal time to harvest grass-fed beef.
So if I'm getting local, I'm in Washington, I'm getting local grass-fed beef for Christmas.
That's not frozen.
That's not frozen.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, we don't want to be. Yeah, we don't want to deal with frozen. But but most likely that's going to be not raised and slaughtered at the correct time. It's going to be fed something different. You think, or what?
Yeah, I think it's really going to be case by case because there's certain parts of the region, certain parts of the Pacific Northwest that are very lush year round.
Yep.
I don't know if you guys know this, but Sequim gets the most amount of sun in the state of Washington than any other part of our state.
Wow! Shout out to
So
Sequim.
the question is, if you can raise grass-fed beef out in Sequim, could you have amazing grass-fed beef year round? I don't know. Maybe we should get in touch with some farmers out in Sequim, right?
Wow.
But if you're talking about grass-fed beef in Central Washington, that's year round. I mean, that place gets a foot of snow.
Yeah.
2-3 months out of the winter. Can you get good grass-fed beef at that time in Central Washington? Probably not. So I think it's really location basis, but I think people just need to look a little bit deeper into where their grass-fed beef is actually coming from and seek out a small farm, and that small farmer will probably be able to give you the real details on how they're doing it, what they're doing, what they're feeding it, and how often they harvest it.
And again, we're talking about gray matter here, right?
Yes.
Again, right? Grass-fed technically is 70% of their life, 65% of their life they're on grass-fed, and then they're finished at a lot or whatever, right? What's the certification?
So I think the small farmers really adhere to true grass-fed beef, but I think the big companies that have created grass-fed beef programs are really kind of blurring the lines on what they do.
Sure.
Like, for example, corn is actually a grass. They say it's a grass, right? Even though it's a grain.
As long as it's on the stalk or something like that,
yes,
right?
and so you can feed
Right.
you can feed an animal a corn silage. So a corn silage is the entire stalk, right? Ground up. It could have kernels in there. It could have everything. It could literally be 50% corn.
Wow.
And you can feed that to an animal
that's technically
and
grass.
call
It's
it
a
grass
really
fed.
big grass.
Right? Like corn silage.
Damn.
That's a grass. That under the USDA classifications, they can call that grass-fed beef.
And so you should look for pasture-raised grass-fed, right? Because
Yes.
you know, we were researching something that said, you know, you want the cattle to engage in their natural behaviors and consume a natural diet. And that seems like, you know, if they're pasture-raised and grass-fed, that kind of seems like some of the best of both worlds.
I believe if you look for that will kind of help determine that it was actually a more honest grass-fed program.
Yep, and there are some third-party organizations like the American Grass-Fed Association that has their own standards and certifications, but you know, at the end of the day, those are probably for the big guys, right?
Yep.
I mean, your local yokel farmer is probably not paying that money to be certified. So.
Absolutely.